last week, Monday, October 30th, Apple had their Scary Fast event. We talked about it on the last podcast. It was a nighttime event. I think Apple's only nighttime event ever, or I don't know, the first one at least since the pandemic. And everyone was speculating that there would be Macs revealed because the logo of it had the Finder, the Mac Finder app icon, and that's exactly what it was. Now, with the Scary Fast event, it was only 30 minutes, not a typical hour plus like most Apple events are, but it's only 30 minutes. We got new Macs like we expected. We got an updated iMac like we expected, but it's just a interior update, so nothing with the design, no iMac Pro, no USB-C accessories. It was just a new chip inside, the M3 chip. Now, along with that, which was expected, they brought out the M3 Pro and M3 Max 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros, which there was some speculation beforehand about that being the case, but people were saying, well, they just updated these products in January, so it'd be a pretty fast turnaround if they updated it in the same calendar year, not even, 365 days from the last update. But that January release was also delayed. A lot of people were saying that this was ripped from the October event, the October Mac event that they typically have. So it seems like now Apple is back onto their, I guess, their ideal update schedule when it comes to the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros. Now, the M3 is based on the 3 nanometer chip, just like the A17 Pro is. So this is the first time Apple's gone 3 nanometer, and I could be wrong, but I think this might be the first 3 nanometer chip in a desktop PC. Could be wrong. They talk about a next gen GPU, the largest leap forward in graphics architecture for Apple Silicon, which is 3 years. So their biggest graphics update in 3 years. They have a new term that a new process that they've created called dynamic caching, which is supposed to help free up memory throughout the system. They have hardware accelerated ray tracing for the first time on a Mac. They just brought that to their A17 Pro, to their phones. So now it's on the Mac also. They were touting how good this is going to be for games. Apparently the performance cores are 30% faster than M1, 15% faster than M2. The efficiency cores are 50% faster than M1, 30% faster than M2, and their neural engine is 60% faster than M1 and 15% faster than M2. Now, one thing that's interesting is they kept on comparing this to M1, and that's where you see the substantial improvements in performance. Not so much when you compare M2 to M3, but it seems like this. It's an upgrade. Yes, it's there's going to be improvements, but if you just upgraded from M1 or if you just upgraded to M2, this definitely isn't something that you need to go on and get. But maybe if you're still on an M1 chip, that's where you could see significant boosts in performance. Now, one more interesting thing that they did was typically when they reveal their new chips or what they've done for the past 2 years is, M1 came out in the MacBook Air and the Mac Mini. M2 came out in the MacBook Air and Mac Mini. This event, no MacBook Air, no Mac Mini. We got the iMac and we got an M3 chip in the 14-inch MacBook Pro. So they finally done away with the unibody, the 13-inch touch bar MacBook Pro. Moment of silence for that device. But it needed to go. And so instead, they've put the M3 chip, the base M3, in the 14-inch MacBook Pro. So it's the same general chassis as the version with M3 Pro. I think you lose a Thunderbolt 3 port. You lose a fan for the internals. But other than that, it's pretty much the same device. But yeah, and it starts at $1599. So you can get a 14-inch MacBook Pro for $400 less than you could before. But when you compare it to the 13-inch touch bar, it's $300 more expensive, and that's in USD. So it's a cheaper device, or you could get in cheaper than before, but you can also it's more expensive to get in. It's kind of like a weird situation. But what are your thoughts on the Apple event? I know you stayed up, with your face paint and you had your Halloween costume on. I know you're really excited for this event. So what are your thoughts on the M3, M3 Pro, and M3 Max products that were announced for this event?
Yeah. So I did watch the event as it happened. I was kind of interested in it because this was one of the first events where we really had no idea what was going to happen. There was rumors beforehand. We've talked about on the podcast about M3 being delayed into next year. And the fact that this event happened was announced was kind of a surprise, because I think a lot of the rumors or the ideas going around is that we won't see another event this year, and if we do, it would probably be very late this year to announce products for next year. But that didn't happen. We actually did get M3, and I actually want to say I really liked the event. I've heard some criticism about this didn't need to be an event, but I disagree for a couple of reasons. One, it didn't overstay its welcome. It was very short. It was 30 minutes, just over 30 minutes, and
Scary fast.
it was scary fast. Yeah. And two, I like the fact that Apple kind of enjoyed the Halloween kind of timing and did a light Halloween theme to the event. I thought that was kind of fun. But also, I'm going to compare it to what Microsoft did recently. And we haven't talked about it on the podcast, but, Microsoft did have an event where they updated some of their Surface products. I believe it was one SKU of the Surface Laptop. It might have been the Surface Laptop Go, and then the Surface Laptop Studio, their flagship laptop, got a chip bump and stuff like that. But there was no event, and it was kind of very difficult to figure out what products were refreshed and which weren't. So I was just, spent more time than I should have looking at each product to see what was updated and what wasn't. And obviously, in a non-US market, that's even more confusing because we don't always get the updated machines right away. So it was very confusing, even though, they want to advertise that they have new machines. They didn't have an event. It was confusing to know what was actually done. This made it very clear. The entire line isn't getting M3 yet. Like you mentioned, it's not the Air yet. It's not the Mini yet. But we are getting an updated iMac and an updated MacBook Pro. Both of them I'm very lukewarm on for a couple of reasons, but I'll get into that later. I will say the main one that I was looking forward to was the iMac. I was kind of hoping we would get not necessarily an iMac Pro, because I think even the Intel version of the iMac Pro is one of the dumbest machines that Apple made. It didn't really make any sense. But one thing I did want to see is, I know some people, including yourself, didn't like the white bezels. Maybe we'd get some color options that included a black bezel would be nice. And I was hoping that the base model, being that we were going to get an updated chip, might be able to support more than just two Thunderbolt ports. And because the upgraded model also has two Thunderbolt ports, but it also has two more USB-C ports that operate at USB 3 speeds. So I was hoping the base model would get all four of those ports. It didn't. It's pretty much identical to the way it was before. Just with the M3, it's kind of a boring machine, but glad that it got updated, considering that machine didn't get M2. It was still sitting on M1 before this. That machine is coming out November 7th, in a couple of days from when we're recording this. That's cool, and I still really like this machine, even though I think a lot of the design of it, I like the design of it, but I think a lot of the choices in terms of ports and the size of the screen are unfortunate, and I think kind of ruin the value proposition of the machine. But I still think design-wise it's really cool. I love the colors. Didn't get any new colors, but we still have the same colors as before. It looks great. The MacBook Pro. So this is one where I'm going to say, personally, careful what you wish for, because I think this new base level MacBook Pro with just the base M3 processor is actually worse than the one that's been discontinued, the Touch Bar one. And for a couple of reasons. Like you mentioned, it is more expensive, but also the M2 processor that was in that machine is, for the most part, identical to the M3 processor in this machine. So you're paying more for very, very similar performance. And yes, the M3 processor does get a little bit more performance than the M2, but I don't think you're going to be able to see a lot of that because once again, these machines still ship with 8 GB of RAM as the base. And a lot of what Apple's talking about with their performance, you're not going to see that in a base level machine, unfortunately. And I think this is kind of my big problem with this whole event is that I have a big problem with the base level of these machines and the prices that they're charging for them, but also the marketing around them. I don't think they're going to be as capable as people are going to make them seem. You're going to get a lot of reviews of people who are going to review these machines, but they're going to have upgraded hard drives and upgraded RAM and stuff like that. And it's going to make it seem like, and also, it's going to be after a week or a month worth of use. And they're going to seem like these incredibly fast machines, but the reality is, in every PC, there's going to be the concept of a bottleneck, and 8 GB of RAM is a huge bottleneck. The one thing I will say that I give them a lot of props for, though, is that with the MacBook Pro models, they did upgrade the base storage from 256 to 512. I don't know if this is the first year they did that or they did that in the past as well, but I do think that's really, really good because I've had many conversations with people before who are interested in getting a new Mac, whether it's a MacBook Air or a MacBook Pro, or even like a Mac Mini. A lot of them have mentioned, well, what should I upgrade? Should I upgrade the storage or the RAM? And honestly, that's like a pick your poison at this point because both of them are going to be pretty big bottlenecks in terms of like if you're using 256 GB of storage, that storage is going to fill up. As that storage fills up, the machine is going to get slower and potentially even start to crash if you run out of storage. And with RAM, what makes that doubly worse is if you run out of RAM, they're going to use swap or paging files to store whatever in your RAM onto your storage, so you could end up running out of both at the same time. So yeah, these machines are weird in my opinion. They're expensive, but like you said, it was time for the Touch Bar model to go. I just wish that this model came in at the same price. Then I could say, okay, yeah, this is pretty cool. The only thing I will say to note is the only real difference in design from the base level new MacBook Pro 14-inch and the one that ships with the M3 Pro is that it also, much like the iMac, only has 2 Thunderbolt ports, whereas the Pro version has 3. So that could be a small consideration if people are cross shopping the two. But the added benefit of that is that unlike the 13-inch one that's outgoing, you do get the micro SD card slot and the HDMI port, which is really cool. So yeah, I don't know. This event, I was glad that it happened, but overall the products to me are a bit of a letdown in terms of the base models. I think once you get up higher in the range, there's going to be very few computers on the market that can compete with them. But at the base level, I think there's going to be quite a few people who maybe buy them thinking that they're going to get the same kind of performance that you would get with a machine with 64 GB of RAM and a terabyte of storage, but they're not going to be able to accomplish as much. And that kind of means that you're going to have a lot of wasted performance on the table with that M3 because you're going to be bottlenecked by RAM and storage. But yeah, overall, glad the event happened. Glad it was only 30 minutes. I don't think it should have just been an email. I'm glad they actually took the time to produce it. And it was shot on an iPhone, which is also kind of cool. But yeah, how about you? How did you feel about the event overall? And how do you feel about the machines?
Overall, I thought it was a pretty good event, especially because it was 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't a huge amount of things that they needed to introduce, right? So it was just, okay, a few laptops, a desktop, and it's not like it's brand new things, right? It's not like, okay, we have to talk about the new ProMotion display and we have to talk about this new chassis. No, they're just updates. So I
Mm-hmm.
think because of that, it was a very quick event. And I am glad also that, yes, this wasn't a press release. This wasn't a press room announcement. This was an actual event. And we got to see Apple Campus at night, which was pretty cool. But yeah, I thought it was a good event. I thought it was just as long as it needed to be. And they got out everything that they needed to. Now, I'm going to disagree on the 13-inch is better than 14-inch. Now, I definitely do agree that I wish it came in a little bit more affordable, right? I think that the $1,600, like, yes, it's a great design, but it doesn't need to be $300 more expensive than the previous version. And even when you compare it to, okay, what are the steps, let's say, in the Apple, in the Apple ladder, the MacBook Air, the 13-inch with M2, starts at 1099. So then to get it to, to jump to the next product, that's 1599. That's a pretty substantial jump. I think if you spec it out the same, so if you give it, the same amount of RAM that this one starts with and the same amount of storage, I think that's only like a $200 jump, but I still think 1599, I still think $1,600 is a little bit expensive.
Mhm.
But if we compare it to the last version, right, and we're saying, okay, this is $300 more expensive than the last version, can I find $300 worth of changes in this, right? Well, I'd say the design is worth a bit, right? I mean, just the fact that you have actual function keys and no more touch bar, it's pretty great. The slightly bigger screen, the fact that it's a ProMotion screen, right? And I reviewed the M2 Pro, MacBook Pro, and the speakers were amazing.
Mhm.
Like, I was literally blown away by the speakers. So the fact that we have the updated speakers, right? Because it's an XDR display, we get 1,000 nits of brightness, 1,600 nits peak brightness for HDR content compared to the 500 nits on the 13-inch. Not to mention the ports that we get, the SD card slot, the HDMI port that we get. So I do think it's $300. I do think there is, enough in there to warrant a price increase.
Mhm.
But whether it's a $300 price increase, I think maybe it should have been closer to like a $200 price increase when you compare the hardware upgrades from the 13-inch. But I do like that they've gotten rid of the 13-inch. I've been a hater on that thing. I'm pretty sure from when it came out, I thought the touch bar was stupid, but who knows? Can't really go back in time and figure that out. But I do think that it's good. The 14-inch now has M3, and we've gotten rid of the touch bar. But I find it strange that they didn't introduce it in the MacBook Air and the Mac Mini,
Mhm.
because they always tout the MacBook Air is their best selling laptop ever. Well, if it's your best selling laptop, why not debut this M3 chip in your best selling laptop? I mean, maybe they're thinking we know we're going to sell the MacBook Air. So let's say if we were to bring out the MacBook Air and the 14-inch MacBook Pro at the same time, a lot of people would just buy the Air because it's $500, I think $500 cheaper. So maybe they're trying to give this M3 14-inch a little bit of time to saturate the market before the Air comes out and becomes their best selling laptop ever once again. And the Mac Mini is like, it's hands down, anytime they come out with a new chip, I feel like we always agree the Mac Mini is the best product that they came out with.
Mhm.
Just in terms of like the performance you get, what you get for the price that you pay, the Mac Mini is always the best product. So it's surprising that they brought it to the iMac first. I guess, okay, the iMac has been the most overdue for an upgrade, so that's why they did it. But I really would have liked to seen MacBook Air and Mac Mini come out with these first, and I'm still waiting for reviews on this. I'm sure there will be reviews soon on, okay, how does the 14-inch MacBook Air or MacBook how does a 14-inch MacBook Pro with M3 compare to last year's 13-inch with M2? I'm still waiting for those reviews. And then we could see, okay, the base level, the air quotes, base level chip with some coolant in it, how big of a difference is there between, year over year performance? And what I'm really looking forward to is what the MacBook, when they come out with the MacBook Air, because they will come out eventually. I mean, if they don't, that'd be ludicrous. But when that thing comes out, how does it compare to the M3, in the 14-inch? Because one thing about this new 3 nanometer process, right, is they're supposed to be more efficient because the transistors are so small. They're supposed to be better for energy efficiency, and they're supposed to produce less heat. And the one benefit when you look at, okay, an Air compared to a Pro is that it has that coolant, so that for sustained performances, like if you're editing a podcast, or you're editing a video, or you're editing photos, you will see a dip in performance in the Air just because the chip overheats and there's no way to cool it. There's no active coolant. So with a new 3 nanometer process and something that theoretically shouldn't get as hot, do we see as big of a difference in performance between the MacBook Air with M3 and the MacBook Pro with M3? That's one thing that I'm definitely kind of like holding my judgment on, at least when it comes to these entry level chips, to see how that plays out. I guess one thing that we didn't mention, the 14-inch and 16-inch MacBooks with M3 Pro or M3 Max get a brand new color. Apple's invented a new color that's never been seen before.
Mm.
It is called Space Black. It's just a matte black. Um, it looks cool. It looks very nice. Not gonna lie, it does. It reminds me of like the black S23 Ultra
Mm.
in a way, but kind of from the pictures that I've seen, it doesn't seem as black. It kind of like plays some pictures in the light, but it looks like a great color. It's only coming to the M3 Pro and M3 Max versions. So if you get the base M3, you can't get Space Black. Everyone knows you don't have the best that Apple has to offer. But I'm interested to see, one, kind of how this holds up with fingerprints, because that's one thing that laptops notoriously, I guess, have a problem with, is they show fingerprints very easily. And then also, I'm interested to see like what is the wear and tear of this thing, because it was last year when the MacBook Air had the midnight colorway, right? And as cool as that looked, around the ports, you could see that the coloring had like gets scratched off fairly easily, and you could see just the base aluminum underneath. So I'm interested to see how the wear and tear on this, because I'm sure it will look great out of the box, but then after a while, if some of the coloring of the aluminum starts getting chipped off, starts getting faded away, it's not going to look like a Pro device anymore. So yeah, there's still some things I'm waiting to see before I pass judgment on these devices.
Yeah. And I do agree with you. I think the M3 chip would have made the most sense to debut in the Air. Just because, like you mentioned, if that's their best selling machine, why not debut the chip in the best selling machine as opposed to this new base level MacBook Pro? And with the new color, it's going to be interesting because they did specifically mention that this is supposed to have a coating that's supposed to be better for fingerprints, but we did see with the midnight version of the MacBook Air that did attract a lot of fingerprints. So if they could make a black laptop that doesn't attract a lot of fingerprints, that would be awesome, because there is no black laptop or even dark laptop, even from Apple or anyone else, that looks good once you take it out the box, because it just looks smudgy, smudges all over the place. So yeah, that would be cool to see. The one thing I'm kind of concerned about when it comes to reviews, and it's the same problem I have with since the very beginning of, I think it really kind of rooted itself in the switch over to Apple Silicon. But this has also been an issue way back since Apple didn't let you upgrade your machines yourself. My biggest problem with a lot of reviews is that, specifically in this event, Apple talks about all these amazing things that you can do with this M3 processor. And, they show like, oh, hey, running these large models and using 3D modeling and doing these very extensive video edits in 4K. But there's two things. One, obviously, we always make fun of the unlabeled graphs. Whatever, that's old news at this point. But they also never tell you what SKU they're using when they're talking about that information.
Mm.
And I feel the same thing when we get reviews, because the biggest problem with computers is that every computer you buy, it doesn't matter if it costs $200 or $2,000. The first week you get it, it's going to work great. It's going to feel fast. It's going to feel fluid. You can have a Chromebook that'll feel great when you first get it out the box. The problem is the resources that that computer has is going to be taxed more and more over time as you install more programs, as you do more with it. And there are a lot of PCs, and I want to specifically say PCs and not Macs right now, because, Apple Silicon does have better RAM management than traditional PCs do. But there are PCs that Chrome itself will use 8 gigabytes of RAM, just the web browser. So for me, when it comes to Apple showing these things and not telling you what SKU, but then also reviewers having, an M3, maybe even a base level M3 machine, but it has 32 gigabytes of RAM and 2 terabytes of storage, that's not indicative of what someone who's buying the base model of that machine is going to get. And I think that's the part that I'm kind of concerned about, because these processors are clearly very capable. And there's a premium that you're paying for that capability. But if you buy a 512 gigabyte hard drive and 8 gigabyte RAM version from the very beginning that you can't upgrade later, you are essentially leaving performance on the table with that M3 processor. You're not going to be able to get everything that that processor can do from it, but you're still paying for this really expensive machine. And on one hand, I think that's not really a problem, because what you're paying for is a really well-built, cool laptop, but you're not getting the performance that's advertised, either in reviews or by Apple. And I think that's the part where I'm kind of concerned about, is that I'm worried that some people might not realize what they're getting in that base level. And even me, I have no idea what you're going to get on that base level, because at the end of the day, unless you have someone who's had that machine for a year or two, that base model, we won't really know what that's going to feel like down the road. And, I won't get into it because it would make this podcast way too long, but I did go through a lot of programs that are native to Apple Silicon, what their minimum recommended specifications were. And all of their minimum recommended specifications were 8 gigabytes of RAM, but all of their recommended specifications were more than that. And I think this is so important with something like Apple Silicon, because the RAM is shared. So it's not just 8 gigabytes of RAM for the CPU. No, that's 8 gigabytes shared between the CPU and the GPU. So any task you're using is going to be using both of those. And we're at a point now where, yes, okay, Final Cut, the minimum recommended specs are 8 gigabytes of RAM. Well, what is that going to be in 3 years from now? Is it still going to be 8 gigabytes? So I don't know. It's just, to me, this was a perfect opportunity for Apple to say all of our machines are coming standard with 16 gigabytes. And maybe that is something they'll do next year. I hope it is, because I do think it makes it very difficult to say, get that base model version, or quote that price for the base model version, but then also you'll never have the ability to upgrade that yourself. What you buy is what you'll have for the rest of the machine's life. And I don't know. I'm a little bit concerned about that. But yeah, I don't know. That's just a little bit of speculation going forward.
No, it's definitely a reasonable concern to have, right? And for quite some time, they've prevented people from upgrading any sort of storage, any sort of RAM themselves. And yeah, it's okay. Maybe 8 gigs works now, and maybe it just works now, right? It's like, it's so perfectly optimized for M2 and I guess M3 that you can get away with 8 gigs. But yeah, when they update Final Cut next year, the year after that, when other people are updating their apps, is 8 gigs still going to be the requirement for that? And probably not, right? That's a good concern to have. But yeah, I don't know. Do you have any final thoughts on this event?
Well, the one thing I will say is, if there is anyone who has concerns about like RAM or storage, one thing I would recommend, and I think we've talked about this in the past as well, check out the refurbished store, because there are so many machines that have upgraded specs and you're still getting the full, Apple warranty from the refurbished store. So you can get a machine that has maybe 16 gigabytes of RAM, but is at the same price as the base model would have been if you got it from like the regular Apple store. So
Mm.
yeah, the refurbished store online, there's some great deals, including with the Mac Mini. I've seen a lot of weird configurations there where it's like someone got like the base Mac Mini but with 32 gigabytes of RAM, and it's a really affordable kind of machine. I don't know if that's really the best spec, but it is cool just to like rummage around the refurbished store. You could probably find a good deal there, considering you are going to get the same great warranty from Apple.
It's a very good point. Very good point.